It's my very great pleasure to welcome Ed Olowo-Okere, who's the Director of Governance and Global Practice at the World Bank in Washington. Just a couple of biographical comments from me or introductions from me. He's been at the World Bank for over 20 years in various roles, and is very much a fellow traveller on the journey to improving public sectors across the world. So Ed's group helps countries build capable, effective, accountable, transparent and inclusive institutions, all of which are words I think that every Auditor General here would agree with as being part of our role too, to help build those institutions and the strength of those institutions. But Ed's team's particular focus is on governance matters concerning those public entities. I'd also like to say that Ed is a little bit familiar with this part of the world. I understand he was a lecturer here at Victoria University of Wellington in the late 1990s. So I suspect, Ed, we've probably got some of your students now working for us. So they're all excellent people. So well done to you, and we very much appreciate that. Also, just to remind everyone, as Ed talks, there's an opportunity to add comments in the discussion bars at the side. I'm sure if there's questions and comments, Sarah can feed them through at the end of Ed's presentation. But anyway, welcome again, Ed. Thank you very much for agreeing to be part of the Congress. It's a real privilege for us to have you here. I also recognise that it's probably not business hours in Washington, although I'm not sure if Washington has business hours, but I think it's quite late in the evening. So again, from this part of the world, we're a bit used to having to get up at 2 in the morning, but we realise what a great inconvenience it is for others. So I really very, very much appreciate you being here at this time in the evening and wearing a suit as well, which I think is most appreciative at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So well done to you. Look, welcome. We've got a really interested group here in what you've got to say. So over to you, Ed.
Okay. Thank you very much for the kind. Do I need to unmute myself? Or can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I'm really delighted to join you in this session. So I'm reminded of my time in Wellington some 25 years ago. I really had a good time in Wellington. So I feel like I'm with you over there. So today I'm going to be talking about the emerging role of Supreme Audit institutions in PFM in COVID-19 context. Now, we all know that public financial management systems are critical for good governance. The Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability Framework, which is called PEFA, this is an initiative of the leading PFM donors in the world, identifies 7 pillars of PFM performance that is essential to ensuring that government policies are implemented as intended and achieve their objectives. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, these dimensions of PFM, or the pillars of PFMs, they are shown on the screen. They include the following: budget reliability, transparency of public finances, management of assets and liabilities, policy-based fiscal strategy and budgeting, predictability and control in budget execution, accounting and reporting, and external scrutiny and audit. Now, these 7 pillars collectively, they contribute to overall PFM performance in any particular country. Now, the question is, what are the roles of Supreme Audit institutions? Now, we can identify at least a dual role of Supreme Audit institutions in the PFM systems. The first one really is that Supreme Audit institutions provide assurance on government financial statements. They independently review public finances through audit products. They focus these audits on attesting to the true and fair view of government financial statements. We also know that Supreme Audit Institution conduct value for money audits. So when we look at the role that they play in attesting to the true and fair view of government financial statements, then Supreme Audit Institutions are a part of public financial management system. And the performance of a Supreme Audit Institution is included in the 7th pillar of PFM system. That is the external scrutiny and audit. Now, in the second role of Supreme Audit Institutions, we can describe them as drivers of public financial management reforms. And in that role, they contribute to ensuring that the 7 pillars are effective. Now, when Supreme Audit Institutions are undertaking the assurance function, as you know, because this is something you do for a living, Supreme Audit Institutions review and make recommendations to strengthen public financial management systems. And they follow up on the implementation of these recommendations by the executive. So when they make recommendations on improvements that are needed in public financial management systems, they are essentially driving public financial management reforms. Now, why Supreme Audit Institutions are generally effective in the assurance role? Because there is a well-developed methodology for doing this, and this is done regularly or routinely. Now, their recommendations for PFM improvements in many jurisdictions are often piecemeal. Now, COVID-19 presents a major opportunity to scale up the impact of Supreme Audit Institutions on public financial management systems, especially when we think about the stress that public financial management system has gone through during this pandemic. Next slide. Let me now give you an overview of the current state of public financial management systems globally. The PASAI initiative that I mentioned earlier developed what is called the Global Report on Public Financial Management. And that was the first global report on public financial management. It was issued this year. And that report indicates significant deficiencies in public financial management systems. The assessments that were used for that report, they were done in the pre-COVID world. For example, the aggregate PFM score for all the publicly available reports from 154 countries around the globe indicates a grade of C on a scale of A to D, A being the highest level and D the lowest. So essentially, if we were to look at it from a classroom score or a student score, it will mean that the score of C is less than 50%. So this shows there is a significant scope for improvement in PFM systems. And we think that Supreme Audit Institutions have a good role to play in helping countries to be able to improve the financial management system, especially from the second role that I mentioned earlier on, that is making recommendations for improvements in public financial management systems. I also want to mention that the global report on PFM shows that legislatures do a better job on scrutinizing budgets than reviewing audit reports. So the role that the legislators play in the upstream aspect of PFM when they review budgets and approve is really stronger and more systematic than what they do in terms of receiving and considering and acting on audit reports. Now, the report also shows that PFM systems in Europe and Central Asia region perform better than any other regions of the world. It reveals that Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia regions have the largest scope for improvement. Now, let's then focus on East Asia and the Pacific region. The report, that is the Public Financial Management Global Report, showed significant weaknesses in PFM systems across the budget cycle in East Asia and the Pacific region. Now, let me explain. We're not talking about individual countries here. We have countries in the region that are stellar performers, but we are talking about on aggregate, putting all the countries together. The most significant areas for where we have weaknesses are accounting and reporting, and external audit and scrutiny. The region did generally well on indicators like transparency of public finances, policy-based fiscal strategy and budgeting, and predictability and control in budget execution. This would seem to suggest that with improvements in accounting and reporting and external audit and scrutiny, the PFM systems in the Pacific, in the East Asia and Pacific region could deliver more effective results. Now, regarding audits, we focus on the audit aspect specifically. Over the past 10 years, supreme audit institutions in the Pacific region generally fared reasonably well on supreme audit institution independence. However, countries did not perform very well in terms of timely submission of audit reports to legislature and scrutiny of audit reports by the legislature. The Congress may like to explore opportunities to improve the timeliness of submission of audit reports, as well as the legislative processes relating to consideration of audit reports. From the World Bank side, we are collaborating with governments across the Pacific region to improve PFM systems. We are expecting many countries to report progress beyond those reported in the most recent PEFA assessments, which we used for the global PFM report. It is important, however, to keep up the momentum of PFM reform across the budget cycle and to continue to undertake a PEFA assessment every 3 to 4 years to monitor progress. Next slide. Now, let's look at the impact of COVID-19 on PFM systems. During COVID-19, we see most often traditional PFM controls and fiscal rules being modified or diluted in many countries. Budgets were modified at abnormal pace, and governments were resorting to large borrowings. Consequently, the balance sheets of many countries face the risks of decreased net worth. We also saw single source procurement coupled with market failure that really posed the risk of abnormal prices for goods and services in a situation where resources are limited. In times of persistent uncertainty and growing government interventions, like we have, we do need strong and capable supreme audit institutions, and their role assumes a greater level of importance and value. Now, if we look into what has happened with past crises, we see that there is the risk of significant and unscrupulous abuse of emergency procedures to divert funding from those most in need, including frontline responders and the poor. During emergencies, the risk of fraud and corruption tends to increase, particularly in countries where the maturity of institutions of governance is low. Now, if we look at the pandemic period that we are going through, or we've gone, I mean, some countries seem to have been able to kind of move into a new phase. We saw this risk of corruption manifested across the globe. Now, Supreme Audit Institutions audits can play a role as a deterrent to those who will take advantage of emergency situation to misuse public funds. So as the risk of misuse of funds and corruption manifested in many of the countries during the pandemic, the role of Supreme Audit Institutions is being recognized as crucial to supporting the government response mechanisms through maintaining public financial management discipline and ensuring transparency and accountability. And past experience from SAIs engagement in government responses to natural and human-made disasters, including health emergencies like Ebola, have provided good lessons for Supreme Audit Institutions to be able to kind of leverage on during the pandemic. Now, we also saw that the risk of business continuity materialized to varying degrees during the pandemic due to lack of preparedness for such an emergency. Most direct impact of business continuity challenges could be seen from the disruption of treasury operations in a number of countries and the inability to really make funds available on time to deal with the emergency situation. I mean, we know of countries where, despite the social distancing issues and challenges, someone must still carry papers from one person to another to have them signed before money could be released. As you know, many Supreme Audit institutions also faced business continuity challenges during the pandemic, and I will talk more about that now. The emergency procedures triggered in treasuries also added to the risk of mistakes, errors, fraud, and corruption. This increased the pressures on Supreme Audit institutions in many parts of the world. Particularly in the face of social distancing and other coronavirus containment measures, Supreme Audit institutions with limited digital capabilities across the world faced limitations in the delivery of audit outputs. Audits are now lagging in many countries, and as we move beyond the pandemic, the need to prepare for future emergencies while clearing the backlog of audits places enormous demands on Supreme Audit institutions. Therefore, the impact of COVID-19 on PFM system can be rightly perceived as a game changer for Supreme Audit institutions. Supreme Audit institutions need to prepare and scale up their activities to respond to increasing demand from the stakeholders, including the governments and also from the legislature and from the citizens. Next slide. Now, in the next couple of slides, that is this slide and the next one, what I want to just try to do is to project into the future based on what we are seeing and what we can learn from our past experience. Now, we do foresee major government reforms in the post-COVID-19 world. We have the health and fiscal and as well as economic shocks that many countries are facing. From past experience, these do provide a major impetus for change. We also see a situation where citizens are now demanding better services from government, and we see issues with trust declining in many countries. And this is going to put further pressure on governments to undertake reforms. So in the World Bank, we are working on the knowledge agenda to reflect on what the future of governments might look like. And we call the work the future of governments. There are a series of public events on this important agenda, including disruptive debates and online discussions. We encourage you to participate in these conversations. Now, with major government reforms, PFM systems will change, and supreme audit institutions will need to adapt. At the outset, let me say that the most fundamental requirement in all of this process is to ensure that supreme audit institutions remain independent. We already see threats to independence of supreme audit institutions in several countries across the globe. This risk needs to be mitigated with collaborative responses from all stakeholders, including PASAI, development partners, and others who are interested in proper use of public money. As you know, the World Bank is at the forefront of the advocacy for protection and promotion of supreme audit independence. As governments undertake major reforms in response to COVID-19 and PFM systems evolve, the impact on SAIs could be at multiple levels. But let me just speak and highlight a few of these possible impact on supreme audit institutions. First, SAIs may need to revisit their current model to ensure it fits well with the changes taking place in governments. As I said, there will be major reforms. And also, SAIs will need to be better prepared for future crises. We have seen a crisis, we have seen crisis before. I think there will be another crisis. SAI could also be assessing government's preparedness for business continuity in future crises. Second, SAIs could evolve as an independent partner and trusted advisor, accompanying governments in the transformation process. So we said there will be major government reforms. Okay, SAIs can accompany governments in this process. The perception of SAI as a fault-finding institution has already been changing for over a decade. That change will accelerate and can position supreme audit institutions as the most reliable government partner and advisor. And provided independence is maintained, it's not a bad thing for supreme audit institution to be a reliable partner and advisor to the government. Third, there will be a greater emphasis on the whole of government approach. So the interconnectedness between various initiatives, programs, agencies will be important. And supreme audit institutions will need to pay attention to that in planning their audit and carrying out their audits. Besides, supreme audit institutions' audit of emergency preparedness can also be a trigger for faster adoption of a whole of government approach, because we see interconnectedness between different parts of government, and just focusing on one aspect and not necessarily looking at the whole picture together is not optimal. Fourth, supreme audit institution will need to develop the capacity to accompany the government in the building back better effort. As we all know, governments will be pursuing a green, inclusive, and sustainable agenda in the post-COVID-19 world. This could be supported strongly by supreme audit institutions. There are a few steps like environmental audits and others that supreme audit institutions have been undertaking. This could be scaled up with additional approaches that looks more comprehensively at the green growth agenda, not just green growth, but also inclusive. The World Bank last month announced what we call the green approach. That is the green, resilient, and inclusive development approach. And this is also to guide our support to our clients. Fifth, we do see enhanced role for supreme audit institutions after the pandemic. Now, the risk of fraud and corruption will continue to be present in any country and might even increase with the various recovery programs and large government spending, particularly in countries with weak rule of law and transparency. So the role of Supreme Audit Institution will be critical in maintaining sound financial management discipline, ensuring transparency and accountability, and mitigating the risk of fraud and corruption. Next slide. Sixth, we'll see that the capacity to audit in a highly digitized environment becomes critical. Governments are fast moving towards GovTech, leveraging disruptive technologies, including things like artificial intelligence, blockchain, and so on. SAIs could follow the GovTech route, not only in terms of the use of GovTech solutions also for their own audits, but also as an independent agency providing assurance on government's technology landscape. We have seen the risk to business continuity materializing and being very high in countries that are less digitized during this pandemic. So we are going to see acceleration in digitization in many countries. So we already are seeing that from the World Bank side, where a lot of our clients are demanding for support on GovTech. So I think SAIs also need to think and look at the direction where government is going and be able to be ready to accompany the government in this process. Seventh, there could be enhanced role for Supreme Audit institutions in service delivery, especially as service delivery assumes a greater focus to achieve the SDGs, and citizens are also demanding for better services, and government must deliver better services to be able to earn the trust of citizens. So performance audits could therefore become more relevant in the post-pandemic world. 8, climate change is now a biggest risk for economic development. SAIs can do periodic audits of government implementation of climate change policy and progress towards various targets, and also sensitize governments and citizens through their audit reports on the need to mainstream climate change considerations in the public financial management system. 9th, participatory audits could grow as the new normal way to conduct audits. The government's huge emergency responses and recovery programs touch on the lives and livelihood of citizens. So citizens do have a right to be part of the process. SAIs can involve civil society organizations and citizens at every stage of the audit process. And so participatory audits could improve the overall effectiveness of Supreme Audit Institutions' audit products. It could also enhance the number of audit observations that are acted upon by governments, especially when civil societies, organizations, and citizens become partners of Supreme Audit Institution. I think the audits will have a greater impact. Lastly, the quality of audits is very important and will become even much more important. Citizens and the whole world look forward to credible audits. The best way to ensure credible audits is to comply with international standards. And for Supreme Audit Institutions, that will be the SAIs. While many Supreme Audit Institutions claim to comply with SAIs, the perceived gap is enormous. A recent study, for example, done by the World Bank, confirms the significant limitations of many Supreme Audit Institutions to comply with SAIs. Next slide. Now, let me now begin to wind down on my presentation by talking about what the World Bank is doing. What we are doing at the World Bank really illustrates the role that international partners could play in strengthening Supreme Audit Institutions. The World Bank views supreme audit institutions as most critical for good governance, and so we prioritize our support to them. The World Bank supports supreme audit institutions in more than 70 countries globally with financing and technical assistance. We are also promoting independence and the effectiveness of supreme audit institutions. The World Bank has great convening power. So we use that convening power, for instance, to facilitate donor signages as the donor chair of the ITOSAI donor cooperation. We believe that greater collaboration between donor partners and supreme audit institutions is extremely important in a post-COVID world. In the World Bank, we are now working on an umbrella trust fund along with several development partners to support supreme audit institutions going forward, because we know with all the government reforms that will be taking place, supreme audit institution will need greater support to be able to accompany the government in that journey. Next slide. Then let me talk briefly about a product that we have put together. Next slide, please. That is the Global Supreme Audit Institutions Index. We know that SAIs needs to play effective role in PFM, but for them to be able to play that role, independence is critical. So as I mentioned earlier on, we have seen a trend whereby supreme audit institutions' independence has come under pressure during COVID-19 in a number of countries. So in view of this background, we are scaling up our advocacy and support to strengthening supreme audit institutions. So how are we going to be doing that? We need the necessary data and evidence to be able to do that advocacy. We also need that data to be put in the hand of other development partners. So we are launching our first report on supreme audit institutions independence in July 2021. That is next month. The report will present the level of independence of supreme audit institutions in each country, while also unpacking the global and regional trends. I hope many of you will attend the public launch event. Next slide. Finally, let me mention that our paper on the role of supreme audit institutions in government's response to COVID-19 is available on the World Bank website, along with many other useful papers. So you may like to visit our webpage. Thank you.
Ed, thank you very much. A really interesting presentation. I particularly liked the way you've positioned, and I guess it's obvious, but it's nicely put in the way you've done it, that COVID actually is a reset point where we're actually seeing the past and the future quite differently. Although I guess with us all being in the middle of COVID, to think of the future. So it's been really helpful you putting those thoughts up on the 2 slides on size of the future. Also commenting about fiscal management systems and their state across the world. I think every Auditor General in the Pacific has that in mind as they do their work. One of the challenges I think we all have is that we can only be as good as the ministries of finances in our countries. You can't audit something that doesn't exist, which is always, always a challenge. And so one of the challenges I think across most of the countries here is making sure that the ministries of finance do prepare really solid financial statements, that they prepare them to international standards, and that allows, of course, the audit process to be more robust because it's coming off a very strong base rather than quality being audited in, if you like, by the SAIs themselves. I don't know if you have any reflections about how the World Bank is helping strengthen finance ministries across the world, because obviously that's the sort of other side of our equation, often on getting accountability and transparency.
Okay, thank you. I think those are very interesting comments, and really right on the point. I mean, we talked about delays in the audit and submission of audit reports by supreme audit institutions. But obviously, the delay can be caused by government entities or the Ministry of Finance together with the entities not preparing the reports on time, and it could also have to do with the quality of the reports, which is then not allowing the audit to be done in a very expedient manner. Now, your question is, what is it that the World Bank is doing to be able to support the Ministry of Finance so that they could be able to, in the first instance, maintain good accounting records and do all the necessary things that they're supposed to do and prepare good financial statements that can then be audited. So we are, from the governance global practice side, we are supporting developing countries across the globe on PFM, on public financial management system. About 33% of our portfolio actually focuses on supporting countries to improve their public financial management systems. And this cover all the various aspects, budgets, financial management information system, or what we call integrated financial management information systems, IFIMIS. And also, as part of that, we also support Supreme Audit Institution. So we are going to continue to provide that support. An area that we are currently working on is how we are going to support countries to be able to adopt and implement international standards. And we know there are challenges, for instance, with implementing accrual accounting standards. I mean, we know countries like New Zealand, Australia have done that, but when you look at developing countries, there are challenges. Although about, I think, almost 67% of the countries also, according to IFAC data, plans to implement accrual-based accounting standards in the next 4 or so years. Now, we know there are going to be some challenges in doing that, but we fully support that. And why do we support that? We believe that will provide more accurate picture of government financial status, and that the information from accrual-based accounting system can be used to improve the management of public resources. And that can even drive some broader public sector management reforms. So we are putting together a package that will allow us to be able to support the adoption of accrual-based accounting standards for the most part. But for countries that cannot do that, maybe the basic cash-based standards. But really, we want to be able to encourage and promote the use of accrual-based accounting standards. And we see very sensible, logical, pragmatic way by which those standards can be implemented. As you also know, the international community is so much concerned about the issue of debt transparency. Okay, in a situation where records are maintained on cash basis, and most Ministry of Finance or their debt offices will maintain the records of debts on spreadsheets and try to get things together in a way, and the records are not necessarily audited by the Auditor General, because these are spreadsheets and different systems and whatever. We don't think the information can be as reliable as you would expect. So if you also want to improve debt transparency and debt management, you need better information system. I mean, better accounting records, and accounting records that can also be audited. I mean, that are also audited by the Supreme Audit Institution. And we think if you look at the IPSAS standard, at the accrual standard, it covers all forms of government financial transactions that could result in debt and how you account for that. So as a result of that, we are also really committed to supporting the implementation of accrual accounting standards. So we'll continue to support IFIMIS, that is the Integrated Financial Management Information System. We support also improvements in accounting standard. We support also supreme audit institutions and also improvements in budgets and other aspects.
I think that's fantastic. And David's reminded us of the good work that the World Bank's been doing in the Pacific over a number of years in this area as well. So that it's good to get that reminder, David. There's been some comments come through. We just might ask a few questions from the floor.
Yeah, so we have a question that's come in from the Chief Executive of the PASAI Secretariat. And she has noted that there's many SAIs that are working to improve their independence situation as audit officers, but often they face resistance from the governments that they're trying to work with when they're asking for changes to their legislation for both organisational and financial independence. And her question is, what would be your dealing with resistance based on your experience?
Okay. So thank you. So this is something that we continue to deliberate on. So I have worked on this agenda as a technical staff, okay, for years. But currently I do dialogue with other stakeholders, especially development partners who are interested in this agenda, and also with the leadership of INTOSAI on this particular agenda, because I kind of work with them as the co-chair of the INTOSAI donors cooperation. Now, the approach to this, I mean, we know the issue of independence is not technical. Okay, we know what is required to improve independence, okay, based on the Lima Declaration, and we've also had like 2 UN resolutions on this issue of independence. So we know really what needs to be done, and it's not something that cannot be done. So it's deeply political. So for something that is deeply political, then the way we are approaching this is, first, I think we need the information, okay, and information not just about one country, but information about every country. Where does each country really stand in terms of independence? And then we want to make that information available, okay? And make that information available so that the government themselves, they know. The civil society organization in a country, they know that the Supreme Audit institution in my country is not, it's only moderately independent or has low independence and so on and so forth. And they can see what aspect of independence that has not been properly addressed. Now, when you have that information available, then there are various stakeholders that are interested in the independence of Supreme Audit institution. For instance, the development partners are, as you may know, for instance, at the World Bank, our default is for Supreme Audit institution to audit the finances that we provide. So if they are not independent, then the audit quality is a suspect. Okay, so we really need them to, so we like them to be independent. We do have a stake in it. So, but that's if we look at our own finances. But we are interested also in the use of public resources properly. All public resources, whether it's about bank financing or it's from any other source, because the twin goals that the bank is pursuing cannot be achieved only with bank finances. You need all public resources to do that. So we are interested, we are a stakeholder. So the same thing applies to other development partners, the bilateral donors and other multilateral donors. So we make this information also available to them so that they see that in this country they are providing budget support to or providing grants to. The Supreme Audit institutions in those countries are not independent, so they have the information. So make the information available to them. Now work together in each country where we see a challenge, and then be able to put pressure on the government to improve or to address the issues relating to independence. Then, in addition to that, if I may say it publicly here, because it's something that will become public, we working together with the PASAI leadership have agreed on the need for an independent, on what we call SAI independence ambassador. Just like you have ambassadors on different issues at the UN, we have agreed on that. And then we are in the process of getting a person of high profile to be able to do that, who can then go into specific countries where there are challenges to have the dialogue and support us in further pushing. So we are going to try, we will be attacking this from all angles. So you see, I've talked about information, I've talked about the donors using the information individually, also working collectively, but then also using SAI independence ambassador. But this is not an issue that I think we can expect to be resolved overnight. I think we need to focus on it and be persistent on it, because it is very important for the overall accountability and transparency in the various countries. I've seen in countries where supreme audit institutions are really independent, they do great jobs. Great jobs.
It does seem like a really strong bottom line to build credibility around the finances of a country, to have an independent Auditor General. A couple of thoughts that have floated through, lots of supportive thoughts about the World Bank's work, so that's good to see, but also a couple of ideas. I think there was one there I saw about tying funding into audited financial statements. So World Bank support might leverage auditors to audit reports from countries, that you don't get this amount of funding until we've seen a audited set of financial statements. Another thought I saw on the comments was about auditing appropriations, if you like, before the money's spent rather than after the money's spent. So bringing the audit function, if you like, further up the value chain. And there's a couple of thoughts about direct support for SAIs who are in countries that are very financially compromised following COVID, and whether there was any thought about that. So three broad questions. One, to what extent could you tie funding into audited financial statements? Whether you think auditors could move further up the value chain in terms of looking at money before it's spent. And then three, there are some audit organisations that are really in countries with very low incomes and probably are not a priority for funding. So could the World Bank support? And that, I think I'm reading these right. The broad summary of some of the questions, but any reflections on any of that, Ed?
Okay, so let me try to address all of this. So on time, funding release to audit of financial statements, I think we have what we call this policy lending. And so in policy lending, we do put different conditions there. I think in many of the countries, we have used the policy lending instrument, for instance, to require the establishment of an independent national audit office. And we've used that as an opportunity to actually have a number of the audit office have a law establishing them and providing them a certain level of independence. Now, how that is implemented in practice, I think that's what the issue is. Now, but the other fund, because we have various instruments that we use to provide funds to countries, the investment financing or program for results financing that we do, it's difficult to tie that to audited financial statements. Although I must say that under the program for results that we do, I could see a number of countries, for instance, where we include what is called disbursement link indicators. That part of that disbursement link indicators is that areas of audit must be cleared, audit the audited financial statement must be submitted on time, and so on and so forth. So we do that. So there are projects where we do that, and I'm happy to share some examples of projects in countries with you. But the investment project financing that we do, and which is the largest part of our the number of operations we do, it doesn't really tailor, it doesn't allow itself to be really tailored to conditionalities. So
right.
that is about that. Now, with respect to auditing before appropriation, now I would think this means before the expenditure itself. I think there are countries where the auditor has also what is called controllership role. They are called controllers and auditor general, and so they have to have a certain kind of approval of release of warrant or something like that, depending on the jurisdiction that you are talking about. Now, I think that's a good. That's okay where that is the rule, but really, what might take the auditor general to pre-audit is not something that we would necessarily promote. But where the controller function is part of the constitution, and then they do that approval or review and approve before warrants are released, that's fine. But auditing before spending, or before payment, I don't know what auditing before appropriation, because appropriation is done when parliaments, when they approve the budgets. So we assume then there is appropriation. So I'm not sure what can be audited at that stage. But if this is about prepayment audit or something like that, it's not something that we will encourage. We actually even discourage that for internal auditors, not to talk about supreme auditors that we see as external auditors. Now, with respect to support to supreme audit institutions in low-income countries affected by COVID and so on and so forth, yes, the umbrella trust fund that I mentioned in my presentation is going to put together a lot of resources that will support supreme audit institutions. We have been discussing with a number of multilateral and bilateral partners who will contribute resources into this trust fund, and they will be available to support needy supreme audit institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. We're just checking on the commentary here if there's any more that have come through. Many size them. Yeah. One of the questions is about, we talk about delays of reporting to Parliament, and you mentioned that Parliament's much better at scrutinising budgets than they are at scrutinising audit results. One of the challenges some parts of the Pacific have is that they might do the audit, but then the results are not published. They're not made public, or they take a long time to get to Parliament in the country, and then their relevance and their impact is obviously less. So, timeliness of parliamentary scrutiny and parliamentary public reporting, I think, is another challenge we face. And I don't know if you have any observations in that space.
Yeah, so I think this speaks to the independence of the auditors, because I think normally if the auditors are really independent, and there is no law or provisions of the law preventing them, when a report is laid before Parliament, that report will become a public document. And I will see, there are countries where, jurisdictions where the Auditor General will address the press and provide a summary of what is in the report. And the report will be available in the public domain. Actually, if that is the case, then I think there will even be further pressure on parliaments to quickly consider the report. I think in a number of jurisdictions, because the reports are prepared, they are laid in secrecy before Parliament, then Parliament can sit on it. They can sit on it for as long as they want. But if the reports were to be laid before Parliament and at the same time made public, then the civil society organizations, other interested parties can take up matters with Parliament, with government as well. So I mean, so this still goes back to the issue of independence. You know, one of the dimensions of independence that we have looked at, and it's part of the Lima Declaration, will be the ability of the Supreme Audit Institution to be able to make their report really available to the public. I mean, to publish their reports. So, to me, I think this requires some kind of changes to the law, where the law restricts the Supreme Audit institutions from making their reports public. But one thing I must also say is that in a number of jurisdictions, the law does not prevent the Auditor General from making the report public after they have laid it before Parliament. It's just that there is a tradition of not doing that. And we also know there are political challenges that maybe if an Auditor General does that, then he or she could be removed, or there could be some challenges to the person's tenure. Okay, so that could be some of the challenges. But I think we really need to get to a point where auditors generals, they put their report, they lay their report before Parliament, then they address the press, they put it on their website, and the report becomes public. I think that would be the standard practice.
Yeah, I agree with that, and certainly in our jurisdiction, tabling in Parliament also protects the Auditor General from liability around things that might be in the report. They get the report becomes protected by parliamentary privilege at that point. So there is in our jurisdiction a safety net in actually tabling, and of course Parliament is very interested in my reports, I'm sure. So tabling them is a good idea. We're just running short of time, but there's a couple of other things here. I think there's a couple of questions that have come through that we just want to clarify.
I think there are more comments.
More comments
there.
on what.
Yeah, I think his comments have probably covered things now.
Yep.
And the information that you've sent through as well will be useful for participants. But
okay.
Yeah.
So Ed, look, impressive, encouraging, and slightly challenging presentation from you. For Auditors General, I think to hear your views from that sort of world stage where you can look across all that you're seeing, but then to realise that all of those challenges I could see those sit here in the Pacific as well, you know, and whether you're a developing nation or a developed nation, I think some of those, you know, the break point of COVID and how you need to rethink the future in a different way to how you've thought of the past, I think was really insightful for me. And I think based on the comments I've seen and the sort of energy that we've got from the group has sparked a lot of thinking across the whole of the Congress. So I thank you for that. I also just again thank you for the time of day. You know, it's probably not what you were looking forward to at, you know, 10 o'clock at night, but from our point of view, it's been absolutely fabulous, and we've really appreciated your time and the presentation and the links that we will make sure get wide circulation. So thank you again, and appreciate the presentation.